The galaxy had known peace for 300 years. The Galactic Federation, a union of 47 species spread across 9,000 star systems, had built something beautiful. Trade routes connected distant worlds. Cultures shared their art, music, and knowledge. Children of different species played together on station decks, never knowing the fear their ancestors once carried. But peace, as Commander Sarah often reminded her crew, was never permanent. It was simply a pause between storms. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the Federation flagship Eternal Dawn, watching the stars drift past the reinforced windows. She was 52 years old, her black hair streaked with gray, her dark eyes carrying the weight of 30 years in service. Behind her, the massive ship hummed with the activity of 12,000 crew members from 19 different species. She had earned her position through decades of service, through battles won and lives saved. The alien admirals who had once doubted humanity's place in the Federation now sought her counsel. But tonight, she felt only the cold grip of fear in her chest. The message had arrived 6 hours ago. Deep space sensors at the edge of Federation territory had detected something impossible. A fleet of unknown origin, numbering over 40,000 vessels, was approaching at speeds that known physics. Initial scans showed technology far beyond anything the Federation possessed. The ships were massive, dark things that seemed to absorb light itself. Within hours, the first colony worlds in their path had gone silent. No distress calls, no warnings, just silence. Admiral of the People called an emergency council meeting. There were ancient beings, tall and slender with skin like polished silver. They had helped found the Federation ago and had guided it through countless crises. But when Sarah entered the council chamber, she saw something she had never seen in its large, crystalline eyes. Terror. The holographic display showed the approaching threat in stark detail. 43,000 enemy vessels, each one measuring over 2 kilometers in length. They moved in perfect formation, like a single organism with countless parts. Behind them, 14 colony worlds had been reduced to ash. 8 million Federation citizens, gone in hours. The other commanders spoke in hushed, desperate tones. Admiral of the suggested immediate evacuation of all border systems. Commander of the proposed surrender negotiations. The representative simply wept, his 4 eyes streaming with pale tears. His lay directly in the enemy fleet's path. Sarah listened to each voice, her mind working through possibilities. The Federation fleet numbered only 12,000 vessels. Even with every ship mobilized, they would be outnumbered nearly 4 to 1. Traditional engagement would mean total annihilation. The enemy's technology was superior in every measurable way. Their weapons cut through Federation shields like paper. Their hulls resisted all known weapons. Running would only delay extinction by weeks. Surrender had already been attempted by 3 colony worlds. The enemy had not responded. They simply continued their destruction. She studied the enemy's movement patterns on the display. Something about their perfect formation bothered her. It was too precise, too synchronized. No fleet with individual commanders could maintain such coordination across 40,000 ships. There had to be a central control point, a brain directing all those limbs. She requested detailed sensor data from the destroyed colonies. The other admirals watched her with confusion. What could sensor data from dead worlds possibly tell them? The information arrived within the hour. Sarah spent the next 4 hours analyzing it alone in her quarters, refusing all interruptions. When she finally emerged, her eyes were red from exhaustion, but her face held a calm determination that made the alien admirals pause. She explained her discovery to the council. The enemy fleet was not commanded by thousands of individual captains. It was controlled by a single consciousness, broadcast from a command vessel at the center of their formation. The coordination that made them so deadly was also their greatest weakness. Every ship received instructions from that one source. If that source was eliminated, the entire fleet would lose cohesion. The admirals expressed immediate skepticism. Even if her theory was correct, reaching the command vessel was impossible. It sat protected behind 20,000 warships, shielded by technology they could not penetrate. Any attack force would be destroyed long before it came close. Sarah smiled, the expression cold and sharp. She did not propose attacking the command vessel directly. She proposed something far more insane. Humanity had joined the Federation only 80 years ago, young newcomers to a galaxy of ancient civilizations. But humans had brought with them something unique, a willingness to consider solutions that other species dismissed as madness. Her plan required three elements. First, she needed the Federation's entire stockpile of null-space torpedoes, experimental weapons capable of creating temporary rifts in space-time. They had never been deployed in combat because their effects were unpredictable. Second, she needed every mining vessel in the system to be loaded with raw ore, the most explosive substance known to exist. Third, she needed the Federation fleet to do something no military force had ever done. She needed them to lose. The Council erupted in protest. Admiral demanded clarification. Sarah explained her strategy in simple terms. The enemy expected the Federation to fight traditionally or to flee. They would not expect the Federation to offer them a target too tempting to resist. She proposed concentrating the entire fleet at the nexus point, a strategic junction where 7 major trade routes intersected. If the Federation fleet gathered there, the enemy would have no choice but to engage. Destroying the Federation's military in one battle would end all resistance. But the battle would be a deception. As the fleets engaged, 300 mining vessels loaded with would execute null space jumps to coordinates Sarah had calculated. These coordinates placed them directly around the enemy command vessel, bypassing the defensive fleet entirely. The null space rifts would create momentary gaps in the enemy's sensor coverage. In those gaps, the mining vessels would detonate their cargo. The explosion would be catastrophic, but not to the Federation. The command vessel would be vaporized, and without their guiding intelligence, those 40,000 enemy ships would become 40,000 drifting hulks, unable to coordinate their fire or their defenses. The Federation fleet would transform from victims to executioners. Admiral pointed out the obvious flaw. The mining vessels would be crewed by living beings. The null space jumps combined with the detonation would be fatal. There was no escape, no rescue possible. Sarah's plan required 300 crews to volunteer for certain death. Silence fell over the council chamber. Sarah met each pair of alien eyes directly. She acknowledged the cost. She did not minimize it or hide behind comfortable words, but she also presented the alternative. Without this sacrifice, the Federation would fall. Every species represented in this room would face extinction. Billions would die instead of thousands. The mathematics were horrible, but they were also clear. The representative spoke first. His people faced immediate destruction. He pledged 50 vessels from his world's mining fleet. One by one, the other species followed. Humanity contributed the largest number, 120 ships crewed by volunteers who understood they would not return. Sarah's own nephew commanded one of those vessels. She had approved his assignment herself. The following days moved with terrible speed. The Federation fleet gathered at Nexus Point, while Sarah coordinated the hidden mining armada. She worked without sleep, checking calculations, reviewing crew assignments, sending personal messages to each volunteer captain. She thanked them not with grand words about glory or honor, but with simple acknowledgement of their courage. They were not dying for abstract principles. They were dying so that children on distant worlds could grow up in peace. The enemy fleet arrived at Nexus Point 3 days later, their dark vessels blotting out the stars. The battle began with devastating fury. Federation ships fell by the dozens in the first hour. The enemy's weapons carved through armor and shield alike. Fire blossomed across the void as vessel after vessel died. Sarah commanded from the Eternal Dawn's bridge, her voice steady even as friends and colleagues perished around her. She waited for the precise moment, watching the enemy formation shift as they pursued the retreating Federation ships. The moment arrived, she gave the signal. 300 mining vessels activated their null-space drives simultaneously. The fabric of spacetime screamed as 300 rifts tore open around the enemy command vessel. For exactly 4 seconds, the massive ship sat exposed, its protective fleet light-years away. In those 4 seconds, 300 payloads detonated with the fury of dying stars. The explosion erased the command vessel from existence. The shockwave rippled through null space itself, visible across half the galaxy as a blinding pulse of light. And then, just as Sarah had predicted, the enemy fleet went silent. 40,000 ships stopped firing. They stopped maneuvering. They drifted, dark and empty, their weapons cold and their engines dead. The guiding intelligence that had made them unstoppable was gone. What remained were hollow shells, dangerous but directionless. The Federation fleet, battered but surviving, began the slow work of destruction. It took 3 weeks to eliminate every enemy vessel, but the outcome was never in doubt. The extinction-level threat had become the largest debris field in galactic history. Sarah did not celebrate. She locked herself in her quarters for 2 days after the battle, speaking to no one. When she emerged, she carried the names of every volunteer who had died, written by hand on paper sheets. She presented these names to the Federation Council and requested that a memorial be constructed at Nexus Point, a permanent reminder of those who had given everything. The memorial was completed 1 year later. Sarah attended the dedication ceremony, standing among the survivors and the families of the fallen. Representatives from every Federation species came to honor the dead. The representative, whose world still existed because of their sacrifice, wept openly as he laid flowers at the base of the monument. History remembered Sarah as the savior of the Federation, but she refused that title. The saviors, she always insisted, were the 300 crews who flew into certain death because they trusted her plan. She had merely done the mathematics. They had provided the courage. She continued serving for another 15 years before retiring to a quiet colony world at the edge of Federation space. Alien leaders sought her wisdom. Military academies studied her tactics. Young officers of every species recited her name alongside the greatest commanders in galactic history. But Sarah spent her final years tending a small garden, watching the stars at night, and remembering the faces of those who had trusted her with their lives. The Galactic Federation endured for thousands of years after the battle at Nexus Point. New threats arose and were defeated. New species joined the Union. But in every crisis, leaders would ask themselves the same question. What would Commander do? The answer was always the same. She would find a way to protect those who could not protect themselves, no matter the cost to herself. That was the human way. That was why humanity, youngest of the Federation species, had earned their place among the stars. Not through strength alone, but through the willingness to sacrifice everything for those they had sworn to defend.